today with the people that were here,
Yes, yes.
and I'm going to be giving them some guidance so that you know what is he doing, what is he thinking, so that you're not confused. So the first thing I'm going to do by beginning is we're here at the Bayard Cutting Arboretum. This is the second day of our two-day workshop. Yesterday was a talk on collage, a brief talk on the history of collage. My name is George Schulman. I'm an artist, and I primarily work using collage as a method of my painting. But I don't only paint using the collage method. The collage method came to me because I love the idea of adding on, and I love the idea of the addition of variety. And so what happens is the paintings start to talk to me, and I had found for myself to make them more interesting, I liked the fact that I could take things from other experiences, not knowing necessarily what I was going to take or use. I have a large Lazy Susan of acquired things that I've gotten over the years. And usually when I take things from that Lazy Susan, it's not necessarily assessing the subject, but it's more about the design pattern and color that I'm using. And in using this, I'm usually using a unique element, which is why that's not in the painting, that's not painted, and it's more graphic, and I find that it's an interesting element to add to the work. So having said that, without being long-winded, yesterday the group was made available with ways to start. One could be a preliminary drawing, the other could be by cutting shapes and then adhering them to the surface, and in some instances the artist would pre-mix color and paint color onto the surface as an alternative option, and then start cutting material and adding to that. And then usually what I find is that you use line and elements of detail to, in transitioning, embellish and reinforce the things that you've glued down, so they don't merely look like they're cut up pieces from a magazine and glued to a surface like a photo album. So it's something complicated to grasp, but what we had were illustrations and examples of books that I brought in to further exemplify what I was saying, so that this thing doesn't become so complicated where I lose the students and they don't understand, well, what is he talking about? Because language can be confusing and listening can be difficult, and since this is visual, it's much easier for me to point and say, this is what I'm talking about. Having said that, in moving forward, we have some pieces that are ready to add the next element of ingredients to their work, and they're going to start pulling things together, adding detail, and in doing that, what I always talk about is what's happening in the center, what's happening in the four corners, what's happening along the perimeters as far as things to think about, and it becomes a structural organization of shapes and colors, and you have to start with maybe one section and then build from it. So what's going to be happening is they're going to start weaving color or design meaning line, to start pulling their things together so that then in the end they want to add certain details, what I call the seasoning or the jewelry or the add-on to the work to bring it together. And lastly, in closing, and I thought about this in coming, someone once asked me, how do you finish and when is it finished? And the point to that point is, it is not necessarily always finished. Someone once asked me, well, you leave it around, you think it's done, do you ever add or change? In response to that question, it took me a while to add and change, because sometimes I've learned that if I become too ambitious, I may add change and ruin what was there. So what I've learned to do, and it's helped me, is I take, this is called acetate, it comes in different thicknesses, and you can draw and paint on it. And then I have what I call a cheat sheet, and sometimes I've taped these together with clear tape to make them larger, but you can kind of flip this up and down to kind of see what was before and what's after, and you can move it around so that as you do your dance of painting, you kind of have what I call a foundation, and you can kind of get to see without changing what was there underneath, and you get a feel for what's happening. Now, Piet Mondrian would use tape, and he would color tape and then paste it on his piece as he was transitioning, because he wanted these things to look like they were done with one hand and no changes and very carefully made. And so that's another way of doing it. Another way of doing what we're doing is Matisse would paint colored pieces of paper, stain them, and then he would cut, and he would use his own colors and materials that he was thinking about before he would do the actual gluing. So in thinking ahead, I spoke to Victoria about a headboard and different things in her work, so I actually brought in a headboard and colors that she was using, because I was thinking about her and thinking about her. So, because what I'm getting at is you may have a mental vision, but it's also good to have what I call a cheat sheet or an armature, because the more you have to pick from, like fruit from a tree, meaning ideas, the greater opportunity you have. And you're not going to know it until you're actually doing and seeing and enjoying. And so, in rephrasing what I started yesterday, you want to consider a subject, you want to consider a color scheme, and then once you start, this thing starts to advance forward, and it will then tell you with guidance what it needs to complete itself. So what I've given everyone here is a foundation of how to put these things together, meaning what materials I need to use it to do it, so that this thing holds together, and also what materials are non-toxic and what materials to use so that the color doesn't change and this thing doesn't fall apart, so that you can add on. What we didn't get into yesterday, which I was aware of because we're doing primarily work with paper and some fabric, is the use of three-dimensional parts that you can actually epoxy to the surface or drill holes and have string going through, which I've dyed, or rope coming through, and different things to add dimension to your work. So there are a lot of different ways to do what you do. The last thing I'll mention, to rephrase what I said, the reason I chose these boards is the fact to rephrase what I said. I can cut them down, and you can change the size, and I can make a cradle for the back, and so it gives you an opportunity to not necessarily be limited to the size you are working. You can add on, or we can take away. I'm going to show you a few quick things that I brought in. This is an earlier collage from my Bronx series, and I would go out and photo shoot people in the street in the Bronx, and then I would take back these Polaroids, and I would then do drawings from the Polaroids, and then I would transfer the drawings using carbon paper, which is like a form of tracing, and then I would draw it on the surface, and then I would start cutting, gluing, and painting. So these became more figurative in nature, and they were telling a story about people in the Bronx where I grew up. So I saw this guy in the street walking with this outrageous outfit, and I figured he was either a pimp or a street walking guy. But then I also saw Godfather 1. And there's a guy in the white suit, if any of you recall the movie, who's this money lender and collector that Robert De Niro eventually shoots, and then he becomes the other guy. But that guy used to wear a white suit and walk around the neighborhood. And so this painting became about that painting. And I listened to a lot of music, so this is called Hoochie Coochie Man, the Suit.
Oh, wow.
And it's about design, color, and drawing. And this is a brass rocking horse where kind of rhymes with what's going on, that he's all that. Then I did another piece that's more recent, and this was shown at Guildball, and this is about actually fish and an aquarium and Matisse, and it's a lot more abstract in nature, but it's also about design and color. So this is more recent. This is within a 6-month window, and kind of what I now do. And this, in starting yesterday, is about flowers and a picture and a window. And when I do these things, I usually work on the gluing and the re-gluing. So the following day, I kind of clean up what happened before, and I'll clarify and exemplify.
Could you do me a favor? I'm sorry.
Sure.
Could you come back here and hold it up? And Deb, could you take a picture of my phone so I can send it to Courtney to put on the website? I want all of us looking and maybe hold this up, you know, between us.
So what would you like me to do?
Be over there and take a picture
Sure.
of all of this stuff going on.
Okay.
George there, like this is the class, could be looking and working on
Most of
something.
use my camera because my camera is a better camera.
Well, take one, and here, why don't you put this up? And I'm gonna pretend that I'm working, okay? Something here, alright, so, we're working. Alright, back.
Everybody wanna look up? All right. 1, 2, 3. One more time. Okay, good.
Okay, perfect, thank you so much. Thank you, Deb.
And you'll send that to me. I just Photoshop it.
Okay.
So what I was getting at
Wait one
is
second.